Hello and welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. I'm Dr. Squee and this is my show. This week going without credits because I'm on a new streaming service and I don't quite know what I'm doing with it yet. So welcome to the fun, guys. Now tonight we've got an interview which was delayed from the other day. Some say it was due to us kind of mixing up our streaming service and kind of when we were going to be meeting up. Other people say there's more to it. Who knows? But we're going to be talking about crop circles. So please welcome to the Dr. Squee Show from the Crop Circles Realities documentary. It says Darcy Weir and Geoffrey D.Calhoun. How are you doing today, gents?
Oh, thanks for having us on, Squee.
Great, thanks. Happy to be here, Squee.
How's everything going today? So we had talked about the documentary. First of all, I was just wondering if you guys could tell me a bit about A, how you kind of got into the kind of world of crop circles, and B, how you kind of ended up making this kind of film about it.
Well, I can quickly get into that and then segue Geoffrey. Basically, I've been making a series of documentaries, well, not a series, but just documentaries that cover the sort of spooky UFO and cryptid sort of phenomenon around the world for a number of years now. And I turned my sights on the crop circle phenomenon because there's actually a pretty deep history. This has been going on. You're in London, or where are you located, Dr. Squee?
Southampton, about an hour down the road from London.
There you go. Okay. So you may know that the Wiltshire area has been heralding these glyphs in the crops for better part of 30 plus years now in modern times. And then people have discussed having them, UFOs over the crops and these sort of spiral flattening formations happening back in the 1600s, actually, which we feature in the documentary. But I felt like this subject was pretty underrepresented in the sort of overall UFO phenomenon. I think it's quite credible. A lot of people are debunkers about it and don't give it any time or credit. But, when I started interviewing Jaime Maussan, I traveled out to Mexico City to his studio and we started filming on some other subjects. Basically, I did a biography on him and how he got into covering the UFO subject in his journalistic career over 40 years ago. And in doing those other documentaries with him, I found he just had this massive trove of footage and coverage of the UFO phenomenon and the crop circle phenomenon in the UK. He's traveled since the 1990s at least every year to go and see the new crop circles as they've arrived every year. So, and Gary King was the first person to walk him through a formation when he flew from Mexico to the UK. So they have a long-standing relationship, and I've built one with Gary King, and we decided to put together this documentary. Geoffrey, he's somebody who I've constantly reached out for help on other documentaries. I made a documentary on Sasquatch, believe it or not, Bigfoot, wild men. And he was a script consultant on that, kind of helped me get through building that arc, building the story. And he traditionally does film, like fiction film type writing, but I brought him in on this and he really wrote the full script from the ground up, like rewrote it and put some good structure to it for this documentary. So I'm pretty happy to have him help me and accomplish that.
Okay, you've given us a lot to unpack there, but I'm just going to start with it's Wiltshire. You're speaking to an Englishman now. You got to get it right.
Wiltshire.
We don't overpronounce that stuff. Wiltshire. Come on, you're rubbing too much sauce on it there.
I'm thinking The Hobbit here. I don't know why.
I'm sorry, but like you're going to interview, you're going to be in an interview with an English guy. You're going to do an English subject. You've got to come correct on the Wiltshire.
Wiltshire.
Okay, there's no need for the accent. That's just I get it. But I mean, yeah, I will say that's actually not far down the road from here, Wiltshire. So kind of it's Salisbury kind of areas in Wiltshire, and that's again like under an hour away from here. So kind of you're very close to our area here. So Geoffrey, how about you? What was your kind of story about coming into this from your perspective?
Well, yeah, I've known Darcy for a while, and I've always enjoyed his work. He's got an awesome eye for documentaries. I mean, he's a really strong director as a documentarian, and he always comes to a subject with a different kind of take on it. And when he was approached me about the crop circle realities, looking at how he wanted to prove how like 20% of crop circles are unexplainable and aren't done by man. I thought that was fascinating, and so I was really excited to kind of come on board and help him narrate that, and also kind of weave in the arc of proving that thesis. And I think we really accomplished it in a beautiful piece of work.
There's certainly some really interesting questions from it, and like I'm kind of going to just own it right from the beginning. I am a skeptic, but I'm fascinated in this, and I do love the kind of exploration. I also kind of like, as much as I sometimes kind of to my friends who are believers, I say it's like, well, kind of like obviously it's kind of got to be evidence based. I also say to people who don't believe, just because you don't believe doesn't mean you can explain everything. And I think that's the kind of interesting area for me, is where it can't be explained, but then does that necessarily mean it's aliens? Just kind of like lay out my stall a little bit going in.
Fair enough.
But kind of like one thing which kind of just to start off with, I want to talk about was the crop circles, or the kind of legend of crop circles before the crop circles we know are established to be crop circles. Can you just tell us a bit about the kind of stories you uncovered there?
Sure. So the first real story that emerged when people started seeing these circular formations in their crop fields out in the Wiltshire area was basically connected. They said that it was a weather phenomenon. They thought that it was caused by ball lightning because people were seeing orbs sometimes. And then they said, as a result of this lower atmospheric phenomenon, there's wind that's creating spiral flattening. And so farmers were finding their crops were flattened perfectly. And you may know, but there's a history of glyphs showing up in the countryside there. There's old stone circles and all that types of stuff that you see from the sky specifically. So this phenomenon, in terms of ancient glyphs that you can see from the sky, has been pretty dominant in the UK for a long time. So people didn't think much of it until they started flying over top of these spiral flattened areas, and they started realizing there was designs to what was happening in the crop formations. In 1678, we have a copper plate from one of the early printing press articles in the UK on the devil shall mow. And the devil shall mow is a story about a impoverished farmer that came along and had to do some work for a richer farmer. He was reluctant to do it because he thought the richer farmer was kind of stiffing him. So they got into an argument. The impoverished farmer walked away from the deal, but then decided to come back and said, look, I know that I'm not going to get a lot more work, so I'll do the job anyways. And the rich farmer said, no, the devil shall mow. And, stubbornly said, forget it. I don't want anybody to do my crop right now. So the next day, the rich farmer woke up and everything was perfectly, symmetrically laid down. And in the article, there's other pages that we don't have in the documentary, but there was said to be sightings of spheres of fire over top of the crops that night. So, spheres of fire, this is something that we equate to orb-like UFO sightings that have happened around crop formations, around these glyphs over the years. And, in the documentary, if you watch, we include that famous video from Jonathan Wiley, an Australian man who traveled over from Australia during the crop circle season in 1996. And he heard sort of like a hum, this sort of buzzing when he woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He was up on a hill overlooking East Field. When he opened up his tent, he saw these orbs flowing around the crop below the hill that he was camping on. Took out his mini DV camcorder, started recording, and actually the full length of that video is 15 minutes. This man named Aaron Sorensen, he took the video from Jonathan, who's a naive young man, and said, I can disseminate this, I can edit it, I can like make a big movie about it. And later told Jonathan that he had damaged the footage, and that's why we mostly only ever see that 10-second clip of the orbs flowing over the crop and this formation being laid out. That formation has been photographed and analyzed quite deeply by Gary King, who's a crop circle researcher I featured in the documentary. He's walked in over 900 different crop formations himself as they've appeared over the years, and he thinks that video is 100% genuine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I found really interesting about that, because when he was walking through the kind of crop circles and he discussed a few of the things which we know about the kind of confirmed man-made crop circles, like, and I think it sounds like from where you're saying about 20% of them being kind of, there's inexplicable things about them. So
Right.
I take it we're kind of like established that we agree that the man-made ones are man-made.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
check, like, don't
totally.
make any
A
assumptions.
good example of a man-made one, I'll just give you anecdotally here. Asahi, a beer company from Japan, many people may or may not know, kind of like Sapporo. They wanted to do a marketing campaign, and they traveled out to the Wiltshire area. You can Google this. They made just their beer label in a flat field of wheat. Now, how many people do you think it took to complete this beer label to look symmetrical from the sky and perfect? How many do you think, Dr. Squee?
Oh, hundreds.
40. And it took them a week. They used, geo location technology, and they mapped everything out. And they also used mowing technology to
See,
cut.
when I said hundreds, I assumed you meant overnight. It's like, yeah, that would take quite a few people. Sorry, over
Yeah.
a week.
Yeah. But the really strange thing about some of these incredibly complex formations, and I can kind of share my screen here and give you a couple that look, super beautiful and symmetrical from the sky, almost perfect, and they seem to hold very incredible sort of messages for us. Here, I'll give you this one here. This is the Chilbolton glyph that people say is possibly a answer to Carl Sagan's Arecibo message that went out in 1974. So I don't know if you can bring that up, but I have that shared there. What we commonly see is something like these showing up, okay? When they show up, no one accounts for people making them at night. They usually show in the cover of night. They come up with the sun. The farmers are the first people to walk into them, or maybe people, onlookers, are the first people to actually walk and navigate through them. Now, this is kind of a photo cutout, so it's not super square looking here, but from above it was. When Carl Sagan created the Arecibo message, he included 10 points about mankind in it. And if you look at this from the top down, there's actually 10 points in response. So the very top area of this glyph is one whole line, and then it's followed by sort of a blob that's a second line, a third line, 4, 5, and then the sixth information line is actually the squiggly lines that are in the middle. That's a DNA structure. Because in our Arecibo message we sent out in 1974, Arecibo is located in Puerto Rico. It's a big radio telescope, and the whole purpose was to send out communications and receive. And when it sent out this message, many of the points were what kind of DNA we had, our bodily form, what planet we live on in our solar system, and the technology we use to send out these communications. We use shortwave radio, and we also use large radio telescopes. And at the very bottom of our message was our radio telescope sort of diagram. In 2000, we actually received, so this is the breakdown, but in 2000, we received this glyph. Can you see that?
Still seeing your previous.
All right, let me bring it up one more time. I'm going to bring it up.
Yeah, I think you have to unshare and reshare maybe.
So in the year 2000, we received this, and we didn't know what it was. Pretty complex, pretty beautiful, very symmetrical from above. And it looks like just a bunch of circles connected by circles, many, right? But when we got the following reply, and the thing is, we always get messages received in the same area year over year, which is the Wiltshire area. So there's a continuity of messaging. I'm going to bring up the other one, which kind of breaks down how the messaging works from the Arecibo reply. Just going to pull that up. And here we go. Sorry, there's a long-winded response. So if you look at this one, we can see our message that was sent out, binary code through the radio telescope. You see these 10 different points of lines, right? And if you go to the very bottom of our message, you see what is looks like an M, but that's a diagram of a radio telescope. And if you go to the very bottom of theirs to the right, you see that same image that I brought up before, that big circle with all these little circles radiating off of it.
Yeah.
That's actually their version of a radio telescope, which is apparently a microwave telescope. And you see their bodily form, you see their DNA structure. Apparently theirs was different. They have silicon in their DNA. They highlighted the different planets in their solar system. That's right below the little stick man humanoid thing. And you see ours, we obviously have the sun, and then on the left side you see the third rock from the sun kind of pushed up. They have the sixth rock from the sun pushed up, but then there's 3 other dots, meaning they have 3 moons. And that they are trying to say they inhabit all of that. So really interesting information. And Carl Sagan denied the credibility of these crop formations, these crop glyphs that were showing up. But the question is, what human group would really want to hoax something like this? Why would they want to build a continuity of messaging and communication with us in such an elaborate way? And also, why is that no one's come forward to claim responsibility for the Chilbolton crop glyphs or anything like that? And that's what those are. If people want to Google them, they can just Google Chilbolton crop circles from 2001 and 2000.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like question I would ask on that. So you're saying about kind of want to fake it and why would they want to not take credit? From kind of point of view of the reason why anyone might want to do it, there is kind of obviously publicity, money, press from this. Kind of what would you sort of say to that? And if you were trying to kind of keep people guessing about it and talking about it, you'd do a consistent message.
Sure. Well, if that were the case, why is that no one's come forward to claim that money and that fame since 2001 or 2000, right? There is the obvious marketing campaign that the Asahi Beer Company made that took 7 days, 40 engineers, and it cost them thousands and thousands of dollars to produce. Those formations that you would have seen there, they showed up in less than 3 hours overnight. The farmers didn't see anybody going into their field with headlamps or anything like that. And what happens is it attracts the world's attention. It's a message that's beautiful, but it also is something that we all end up talking about and gets disseminated in the news and so on. Obviously not very effective because the mainstream media doesn't hear about this stuff at all.
A few questions which kind of rise from some of that stuff. So first of all, when kind of you're going through the field during the documentary, there was talk about a few things I kind of wanted to unpack there. So first of all, there was talk of how kind of symmetrically it's done and how that kind of doesn't fall in line with the crop circles we know to be man-made. If you'd like to just talk a bit about that.
Well, some of the man-made crop circles are symmetrical for sure, especially the Asahi one that I had explained. But it requires more time, it requires more manpower, and it requires lots of money to do it. The ones that have shown up very mysteriously, like for example, Gary King's incident at 777, he was camping out on Knapp Hill over East Field, which is the same place that that UFO video we feature with the it's called Oliver's Castle, which is the formation that shows up in that. Near there, he had seen a flash of light, and that happened at 3:30 in the morning. And an hour later, when the sun was coming up, they saw a 1,033 foot wide formation appearing in the light. And, everybody was in their tents that night. There was 3 people on the hill, Gary King and his girlfriend, and this other researcher that had set up cameras to record everything that night. Now, this gentleman had come there because he had an orb incident. He had seen orbs floating over a crop 20 years ago, and he had been chasing and trying to record the same phenomenon year over year. This year, he got a flash of light captured on his cameras, and there was no tire tracks, no footprints through the field. There was literally just them walking through the field as the sun came up. They were the first people walking in, and everything was perfectly flattened, over 100 circles joined. Gary King describes it as if you took the time to create that from midnight to when light actually started to come up, that's one circle per 2 minutes. And no one accounted for people with headlamps creating that type of thing. And Gary King, let me tell you, is not rich, not famous, and he's not making. This is probably the only documentary he's ever been in. So he's been researching this for over 20 years. So if the claim is that he created this with his girlfriend and the guy recording, how come they've never become millionaires from this? Because there's no money in it. It's literally a strange phenomenon that's happening, and that's it. But let's. I think Jeff's got to go
I
soon.
was going to
So
say,
maybe.
Darcy, we will continue talking about this. Jeff, I am aware you've got a kind of half-hour time crunch on us today.
Yeah, that's okay.
Anything you want to kind of quickly shout out in the last couple of minutes before you
I
head
would
out?
actually, yeah. So,
Yeah.
about marketing with crop circles. So, crop circles have kind of gotten into pop culture and are considered its own art form now. Do we still have Squee?
You still got me?
Okay, all right. So, so it's there's jewelry made on crop circles. There's a whole kind of sub art to it, but you also have to look at the crop circles themselves and how the crop circles are made. If they're man-made, the plants are crushed, right? The stalks are broken and it's very rough patch. But if it's through the phenomena that we can't explain, the nodes themselves of the plants are elongated from some kind of a superheating process that allows them to bend and fall over each other, interweaving. And this is actually, been scientifically researched and identified. You can see a difference between a man-made crop circle and the 20% that are unexplained. And then they've even found microscopic magnetic particles within the cathodes. And I know that sounds unbelievable, and I know that sounds wild and eccentric, but there is science to prove it. And so I think that is something that needs to be considered as well, because a lot of people say, okay, well, hoaxers could do it over this kind of time. And Darcy's absolutely right. That, it would take 2 minutes to make one crop circle in some of these really elaborate designs. If you put all of that stuff aside and really look at the science of it, it is quite remarkable. But thanks for having me on, Squee. Darcy, it's always a pleasure to see you. And I hope that the listeners of the show really kind of lean in and check out Crop Circle Realities, because I haven't seen a doc like it out there, and I think it's pretty awesome.
I'm definitely going to
Jeff.
express some of
Good to
those
see you,
things
man.
you brought up just there. Lovely Star Wars collection in the background as well, by the way. I'll catch you soon.
Thanks a lot. All right, bye.
See you, buddy.
Darcy, bye. Maybe you can answer some of those points, because there were some things which he's mentioned there which I did want to raise. So with he talked about the kind of field, and I think that was what I was referring to. The way it was flattened was mentioned, and kind of how those results wouldn't be quite achieved by some of the man-made methods which we're aware of. One thing which was mentioned was the fact that, as he's mentioned there, it's like the amount of people who went in to do scientific studies on kind of like things emitted from it and how it's kind of like presenting all this. But it was mentioned there was a lot of people who went in. How was the, I want to use a better term, but the crime scene kept so that it wasn't
Clean.
interfered with by the different, because if you've got hundreds of people coming in and doing different projects there and different bits of research, how was it maintained that that wasn't affected?
So, a couple things. With the Gary King incident, the 777, the crop formation that showed up before his eyes, really, they were the first people to see that, and they were the first people to enter it. It's all on video. This is proof. But what they did was, at the time, there was a scientist named William C. Levengood, man from Michigan, who took interest in the crop circle phenomenon. And he wanted to test the soil and the actual, straw or whatever it was that was used as a medium to create these designs. And he took the samples of the soil and the grass from 777, from that event. And he did his first tests on those, and he found, like Geoffrey was telling you. So what we often see is one strand is laid over another strand that has fallen here, and it kind of weaves, and they hold the formation down so the design can sort of stay connected, right? And they had taken that grass. He had done some tests. He checked. When he opened up the stalks, he saw that spheres of metal had been sucked into the cathodes of the actual plant, right? The vertices, these little bending joints. And they had been elongated. Now, why. And there also seemed to be these little holes that looked like expulsion cavities, like steam had kind of boiled out of the plant and released there. So what he had deduced from this reaction, and he had literally taken normal crop foliage and put it through a microwave, and you could see when you microwave the normal crop, the sample group that was not subjected to the control group, right? He saw that it would bend. It would almost like the crop would melt to a certain degree if you put it through some microwave radiation. Some, not like throwing it in a microwave for 5 minutes and walking away, right? You'll kill the plant for sure. But what Gary has found, and many other researchers that have looked into this, the formations that show up that seem to be very anomalous in the way that they're created. They don't seem to be crushed as if they were made with a wood board and rope like Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley claimed to have done for all the crop circles pre-1991. These formations seem to almost lay down together, but then when the sun comes up the next day, later in the day, around 4 or 5 o'clock, if a group has not come and walked over the formation and pattened it down, what happens is the plants are actually not dead. They're subjected to this radiation to a certain extent, but whoever's creating them doesn't want to kill the plants. So the plants start to rise back to the sun, meaning phototropism. You know, phototropism is where you take a pot, your flower in a pot, you put it by the window, the sun moves over to a certain part of the window during the day. And when you come into your kitchen or your living room, you'll all of a sudden see the leaves are trying to arc towards where the sun is, or the stem for the flower has moved towards where the sun is. This is phototropism. This is a plant's evolutionary way to try and soak up as much sun and create photosynthesis for its energy as possible. So it's following the sun. And for these crops that are still alive, they're not crushed, they're made in this mysterious way that we don't really have the technology for right now. They seem to have phototropism. They start rising back to the sun at a certain part of the day, and they're thriving. They're still alive. And that's a really unique part of this whole mystery.
Yeah, and when Gary was walking through the area, when he was talking about this, he did talk. The only thing I kind of have questions about, and I'm sure there's kind of like, I do understand in documentary, you don't have time in a 2-hour documentary to walk through every step. But when he was going through the kind of area, and he said, it's like, well, this isn't explained. This area is patted down, but someone must have walked through that. Now, is that kind of like a bit more looked into in the kind of real world than it appears in the documentary? Because it seems to be just decided that someone's walked through there. Like,
Okay. So for context, to give you a bit more context. So for that video that you're talking about, that's the canola field with flowers, right? It looks like kind of like a big 3D cube that's in a circle.
Yeah.
And it's in a yellow field of flowers. So that's another interesting aspect of this phenomenon, is that it doesn't just show up in a crop field of wheat on a flat ground. It shows up in canola, which is a plant that has a stem as thick as celery. Okay, that's a medium that's not easy to work with, and it has flowers, yellow flowers growing on top of it. So that's hard to work with without breaking. Canola is very fragile. If you used a wood board and rope and you started crunching down, at the very base of the stalk, it would just crack in half. It would crack. It would not look like it's bent down in it's sort of like it's laying down. Now, that's one aspect. This also shows up in maize, corn. It shows up in soy, barley, your wheat, all these different mediums to work with that are harder to work with than just wheat. Anyways, so this incredible 3D geometric shape, like I said, it was a sphere floating in a circle, showed up on a hill. And when you fly over top, which they did, they did a drone flyover of it, it looks symmetrical. So if you're a group of men with boards and rope, and you want to make this design without destroying the canola, and Gary has said this in other interviews we've done together. It's too bad we don't have Gary on this, but he's walked. There's actually been video of people making a crop glyph in a canola field before, and guess what happens? The stalks crack in half. The flowers completely get mangled and fall everywhere, right? And they get ripped off as you're sliding this board along, kind of shearing the flowers off. So it looks like a mess. When you're walking through it, it looks like a flower graveyard. You know what I mean? Whereas when he walked up to this formation, everything was being subjected to phototropism. All of the field was still growing, and some of it was coming up, some of it was more flattened, right?
No, sorry to derail you a little
bit.
Darcy.
And he said,
okay,
that over there looks like it's been walked on. Now, when a farmer finds these, they do one of two things. They don't tell anybody about it, and they're pissed off, and they usually will mow it quickly because they don't want unwanted foot traffic out to their farm. That's one thing that is very common. So many years have gone by where there have definitely been crop formation that have showed up that have been mowed, and we've never even been able to experience them because the farmers don't want unwelcome guests. And one thing this does attract is unwelcome guests. People jump up over the fence, they walk into the formation, they walk around it, they drink a Coke, they throw the can down, they leave litter. We're messy people, we're disrespectful. So farmers don't want people on their land. Gary gets often invited, and he also calls around to ask for the ability to walk on to these properties when they find the formations. So he's been doing this for over 20 years, and there are people that live in the area that are also like him that are interested in the formations. And when they appear, they give him a call and say, hey, one has appeared today. We should call the farmer and see if we can go walk on them. Oftentimes, there are other people that will walk onto the formation that the farmer doesn't want. And I think that's what he was referencing there, that he wasn't the only person that went to that formation that day. Sometime he lived, closer to London. And so sometimes, the 2-hour drive to get out to the Wiltshire area is harder, and you can't be the very first people to walk on these.
Oh, of course. It's just when he's kind of presenting the evidence of kind of stuff which kind of obviously, I'm no scientist here. I don't have probably even the worst of the explanations. But when he's talking about the kind of things he can't explain, and he talks like about the way it's formed, and then he talks about the footprints, it seems to be kind of assumed to be footprints when it's like that could be seen by some as dismissing things which aren't convenient to the kind of version of things that he believes.
But then all I'm saying here, Squee, is
sure.
if you think the footprints are from a group of men who have used wood boards and rope to crunch down and create that formation, and that's the leftover evidence of them doing that, then how do you explain them not destroying the crop and the crop growing up to the sun? And that is the problem. Therein lies the conflict in the recipe of how that was made, because that, if you look at a canola field that has been made by people, and Gary has seen this himself, it looks like a flower graveyard. It is just like everything is mashed. And
I
that's
mean,
not how that formation was found.
and I'm not positing that it was done in any particular way. I'm just kind of talking about the kind of selection of, like, I'm not saying that he is doing this, but some could argue that kind of, if you assume the bits which don't fit what you're going towards are footprints, like, how much has that looked into is all I was kind of like just looking at.
Yeah, that's fine for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to seem as if I'm kind of like trying to suggest one thing or another.
No, and I
I just
mean,
found kind of like certain things pretty
it's
interesting.
in the documentary for people to make
Yeah,
their
yeah.
own mind up. I mean,
Oh, of course.
if people connect to that part of it and they go, well, there's footprints there, if that part is a bit mangled because there's footprints there, then it must be man-made. That is
Oh no,
somebody's.
I don't say it must be one thing or another. I just like there's certain things which kind of yeah, some things which certainly more point towards the inexplicable, and some things kind of like then you look into why that's explicable.
Yes, of course, I understand.
Uh, the other thing I wanted to get onto, so he mentioned about in the documentary, it's mentioned that with the fields where these kind of these crop circles have happened that are less explicable, there is a kind of when it grows back, it grows back with the pattern still in it. How much was that kind of compared next to the ones where we've kind of had people kind of claim them?
Yeah, the phantom crop circles, or the crop circle ghosts that
Yeah,
so I think that's it's called Clay Hill, and that was in 2017 and 2018. That formation showed up originally, which again was a 3D geometric shape. It was kind of like a cube within a massive circular formation.
yeah.
Um,
And I think
and
they did mention there was a few of the crop circles where it tended not to grow back. Like, you could see the crop circles
yes,
many harvests
so
later.
we showed that video evidence.
Yeah.
Gary has seen this in person many times over. And I'm trying to work on a follow-up documentary where we answer a lot more of these questions
Yeah.
that you're even asking, right? But there's two things that he has noticed that have happened with this phenomenon. One is that, yes, so with that Clay Hill uh, formation, it showed up in 2017. This showed up, I believe, in a field of soy, and then that was mowed, that was yielded, and the next year, a field of canola was there. You could see the yellow flowers, and it didn't grow back. The canola was not able to grow in the area where the formation was the year before.
Yeah.
This sort of ghosting also, the second thing that he noticed is that the farmers will get snow sometimes in uh, the following winter, and this same formation will not be covered in snow. For some reason, the snow will be all around it, but not in this in the Clay Hill formation. So
And did
that's
that
another
seem to be unique just to that particular one, or some certain circles, or does that seem to be a commonality? And like, yeah, again, is that measured against kind of man-made circles if kind of similar things happen? Because obviously, if you
yeah.
plow through something, you can see after effects in anything like later because the ground can be affected in lots of ways. Has that been looked at against that?
Yeah, so what he looked at, what could be a possibility, is that when the formation is made, when the medium of, let's say, wheat is laid down, and the seeds from that wheat are sprinkled off and hit the ground, the first year. Let's say Clay Hill was 2017, it was wheat. I can't remember what it was. But when that gets laid down and the seeds fall off and hit the soil, what happens, he thinks is possible, is that all those seeds that were not intentionally meant to be there may possibly get pushed into the ground from people visiting and walking through. When they're walking through, they're stamping down the seeds, and then this creates a sort of carpet of pre-planted seeds. And what happens in modern day farming is, especially with canola, the farmer has machines, and as you know, it's not like back in the day where they just plow and then they hand, put in seeds into that little mud mound that they plow, right? What happens is they have a machine that is almost like industrial. It goes through and it drills holes as it goes through. Plunk, 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 plunk. It drills these holes into the soil, and when it drills holes, it punches down a canola seed in each hole. And what is possible is that because there's this layer of the wheat seeds that fell down when that formation was laid out, it creates this root mat of already germinated seeds from the year before. And then the canola seed tries to grow up, but because that root mat closes up the hole, it can't rise above that root mat that's been created from the other crop that was laid down, right? So that's one thing. But he says, well, why is it also that when it's snowing, the snow won't go on that area?
But again, I will ask the question: has that been compared next to man-made ones? I just again.
Yeah, I mean, it has been compared next to man-made ones, he says, and it just doesn't. It doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. One thing I kind of was really interested in as well is the kind of the orbs in the sky. That's kind of quite a common phenomenon, quite a commonly reported things, not just around crop circles, but in so many other cases.
Yep.
What do you have any doubts of that it's just aliens, or that it could be something like, for instance, a lot of people have kind of suggested things like this could be any number of kind of government kind of things. Like that's another kind of common conspiracy theory, just to use the sort of common parlance. I don't mean to sort of denigrate it, but
no, yeah.
Do you ask any kind of have any kind of questions about it?
Yeah. So my own theory on orbs is that they're not man-made. I would. So people will say all the time, well, if you're an alien race and you're making these messages in the crops, you're making these agroglyphs is another word for them that can only be seen from above. Why would you do that when you can just take your alien craft and land on the White House lawn? That's commonly said by skeptics and debunkers. And I think what the real problem is here is that many people are illiterate on the history of the UFO phenomenon. If you go back and you look at events like the Battle of LA that happened in 1942, we have a sphere, not a sphere, we have a classic saucer-shaped craft that was hovering over top of Los Angeles during World War II, and artillery and shells were launched at it, over 1,200 rounds, I believe. 3 people died from shrapnel falling from the sky. And there's a famous photo, you can Google it, the Battle of LA 1942, and this was published in the newspaper the next day. You see all these spotlights aimed up at this craft that's just hovering over the city, and we tried to shoot it down. And then you hear about 1947, Roswell. There was a crashed craft. The American military, the Air Force, came forward and said, we have recovered a crashed craft. After that, they got cold feet and they said, no, wait a second. it's actually a weather balloon. And people said, wait, what are the bodies then? There, people said that there was bodies being recovered from the crash craft. There's hundreds of witnesses that have come forward about that event, not only cleaning up the debris, but seeing bodies being brought back to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and so on and so forth. This has a deep history to it.
Now you
This one
see with
incident.
that.
Just wait.
Oh no, okay.
And
Sorry.
so what I'm saying is, there's a continuity of us shooting at craft that is in our airspace that's not our inventory. And if you go forward in history to the Tic Tac UFO from the U.S. Pentagon had released and actually said recently in 2020 in May or April, they said this is not part of our inventory. We do believe this is not from any foreign adversary inventory. Therefore, this is probably not human made. And there's the gimbal UFO incident that happened with USS Nimitz, off the coast of the US as well. And these craft seem to be not shaped like our craft, not operating like our craft. They ping pong around the sky and then fly off into space as if it's child's play. And we don't have that type of propulsion system, I believe. From my research, I don't think we do. And B, we just don't have, if we're scrambling fighters and all this type of stuff to try and obviously engage with them like we always do, this is perfect reason for why, if you are a race that is trying to interact with a hostile race, what's the most peaceful way to do it? You can leave these agroglyphs. You can you can put them in year over year into the crops as a messaging continuity. You're basically saying, we're going to keep doing this. We're going to lay them every year until you guys finally catch up and give us a chance to land peacefully. You know what I mean?
Okay, I do have to jump in just a little bit. Just a few things to unpack from all that. I mean, I think the only thing I would say kind of about that is the same thing would be true in Roswell. I believe it's quite kind of possible something happened. I'm not saying it's not possible it's aliens, but I think also most of the stuff you've just said would be very true if it was a top secret fighter plane or some kind of method propulsion that either the US military or any other military had. And they may have said, oh, yeah, something crashed. And then someone said, shut up. No, we're not talking about that. Like whether it's theirs or a foreign powers. I think everything you said there would also be true.
It's possible. But, are we going to say that the gimbal UFO and the Tic Tac UFO are China or Russia? No way.
I'm just using it. Hey, look, we could go into kind of all these different examples. I just think Roswell is the kind of probably greatest example because we know it was an Air Force base. So the likelihood of something top secret being
but why would the Air Force, if it's Air Force inventory, why would they come forward startled with this revelation?
Because individuals make mistakes.
Sure.
And then the greater military gets involved and then shuts them the hell up.
Sure. I mean, that's an explanation that many people have taken because they just don't want to perceive the fact that we live in a cosmic ocean, we're being visited, and that's actually the major thing that the military industrial complex is trying to shut up, because it may disturb our way of life. It may disturb our fossil fuel industries. It may disturb our politics and religion, which are all methods of control.
Sure. I just like, again, I'm not saying that it has to be that, but it's just that argument seems as plausible as kind of the alien argument as well.
I'm sure the Air Force, I mean, there's plenty of tales that the Air Force has been trying to reverse engineer technology that's not ours. And I'm sure we do have some kind of working model that demonstrates motion or speeds that these Tic Tac UFOs and gimbal UFOs demonstrate to a degree, right? But I think with any successful military, you're going to keep that stuff hush hush because that is your ace in the hole.
But yeah, that would point towards them trying to keep us. Anyway, like we could go back and forth on that particular point. But all your points are well made. Just a couple other kind of areas I want to go into. For you, going through this, what was the thing that you previously believed going into this that kind of turned out not to be true? What, like, was there any discovery on that side of things for you?
Yeah, that Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley created all the crop circles. That's just patently a lie.
So you believe that going in to begin with yourself?
I believed before I really investigated the crop circle mystery or crop circle reality. I believed that many of them were man-made. You know, obviously, if you can take a wood board and a rope, you can make a crop circle. But look at the quality of the ones that Doug and Dave made. If you look at the history of that, if you go back and you look at those photos, they're nowhere near as symmetrical. They're nowhere near as perfect as the ones that we have showing up under these anomalous circumstances. And, you know, at the same time, Gary King, for example, has witnessed, you know, a strange formation show up in front of him in the cover of night, and they wake up to see it as the sun rolls up, and they're the first people to walk through it. In one night, it has been reported in the UK and in parts of, you know, the air, probably near where you live, like you were saying, over 6 crop circles have showed up. If you have 6 groups of men, women, what have you, coordinating to create 6 different intricate designs in one night, that is extremely, extremely hard to achieve, especially when you compare it to something like the Asahi campaign. A week long, 40 engineers, they used all kinds of technology, and that's how they made it look symmetrical and perfect on a flat surface. The canola field formation that we showed that Gary King walked in, this was built on a hill. You know, to make something look perfect from the sky, completely symmetrical from the sky, not like oblonged, that takes a lot of craft and skill in one night without damaging the plants. The plants are still growing, yada, yada, yada. I mean, there's just so much to it.
Yeah, I guess I kind of was more trying to get at, because I mean, would you say you were a skeptic going in? Because it sounds like you were kind of a believer going into it. So to say that's something you learned, that it was kind of like it was more likely alien in your view, seems like something you were kind of going in with.
I mean, I've always wanted to do something on crop circles. I watched Signs when I was in high school. Everybody likes M. Night Shyamalan's Alfred Hitchcockian portrayal of crop formations. In his film, they were being used as waypoints for an alien invasion, you know, signals for the other craft, you know. That's cute, but the actual evidence of what crop circles constantly are demonstrating in the UK, the ones that seem to be made by intelligent authors from off planet, let's say, is that they're extremely peaceful in nature. The message is, we're here, guys. You're not alone. We're watching. We can see what's happening to your planet, and we have concerns. You know, if you believe that they've been leaving these for many years, and the thing about Doug and Dave that people don't understand is, in 1990, there was this incredible formation that showed up. You can look up crop circle Eastfield 1990, and this showed up. It was massive. It was very, very long. in the field. This attracted thousands and thousands of people. Like, there were so many people that were showing up to this formation. They were jumping over the fence of the farmer. The farmer was pissed off. They were like hoarding this area, and they ended up, you know, parking all their cars alongside of the road of this farm, Eastfield. It showed up in Eastfield. This is the same place that many formations have shown up. And police officers were just walking along the road, handing out tickets to try and get people to move on. Well, right after that formation showed up, right after this had reached this peak in popularity, and so many people had, you know, interest in this worldwide, you know, Doug and Dave came forward right after that and said, we've created all of them. And people said, well, did you create the one in Eastfield that thousands of people went to? Yeah, we created that one. Okay, show us how to do it. They show you how they do it, and then they do a flyover to show their crop circle, and it looks like garbage. It's not symmetrical. It's not perfect. But the mainstream media has made their decision. They've said, Doug and Dave have done it. Let's move on to soccer. Let's move on to football. Let's move on to hockey. Let's move on to politics.
We call it football over here.
Sorry, let's move on to footy, whatever.
Pity, I appreciate that effort.
So, you know, it's like, it's just the easiest answer. Occam's razor is what prevails, and people don't want to be challenged by something that's different and a little bit out there. And, you know, the world is not super simple, and the universe is different and out there. So we're being presented with that. And yeah, I went into this wanting to know more about the history of crop circles. If at any point that I thought it was going to be complete and utter bull crap, I would have not created the documentary. But there was just so much evidence being laid out, you know, that the people are not subjected to, and in a way, I feel a bit like an activist. I want to present data that hasn't been well represented, and that's why I made the documentary.
Have you got another about 15 minutes? Awesome. Let's continue on. So another thing which I wanted to ask about, when you're exploring these fields, is there anything which kind of like during the documentary you kind of unearthed, or was it kind of all stuff which had been coming in? So was there any kind of like fresh evidence to come out of this, or is this kind of more a compilation of kind of previously discovered?
I mean, if people do their research, if they look into this subject, they'll find that the anomalies of sort of electromagnetism being present in some of these fields, in the crops, you know, like we showed and discussed earlier, William C. Levengood's studies, that stuff is there. The geometry, the symmetry, the perfection, that is there. The fact that some of these show up in a matter of minutes, in the case of the Orb UFO video that showed the Oliver Castle formation being laid out, that was a matter of seconds. But then you've got Gary King's sort of anomalous video where that seemed to show up in a sudden flash. This information's out there, but I wanted to build a chronology to it. And if you look at many of my documentaries, I do that. I do a sort of history lesson going from the beginning to now. And at the end of this documentary, you know, I even included the 2020 glyph that showed up, which was a COVID-19 formation. You know, no one's come forward to say, hey, we created this again. And it shows up the same year that the world is being haunted by this pandemic. So, you know, there's messaging that's constantly being presented every year, and there'll be something this year, there'll be something next year, and there'll be something the year after. I guarantee it.
And something which I want to kind of get into, because you mentioned about how like it's seen as them communicating this way as opposed to landing, because traditionally things that land that we're not expecting don't end up getting treated very well. And I think you could pare that down to a country level kind of a thing as well. So yeah, that kind of seems like a very good parallel there. But why communicate? So like, for instance, the Carl Sagan, the answer to Carl Sagan, if you will, to that kind of message we sent up in that corn circle. Why communicate in that way? So if they can decipher all this information we've sent up, why not kind of write in words? If they can decipher that, why could they not get our language as easy?
Okay, that's a good question. So, from what Gary has sort of investigated and told me is that if the universal language for any species is math, right?
Yep.
One thing that we constantly see in these glyphs are symmetry and geometry. And geometry is math. It's just number in space. So the number 2 or the number 3 is a triangle in space. The number 4 is a cube in space, right? And what we constantly see in these is communication, language in math. And also, we see reflections of where we've been in history and where we're going. So, for example, we see signs of our technology. They show signs of our technology. For example, you know how there was the Chilbolton crop circle, the Arecibo reply? That showed up right next to a. If you look at the Chilbolton, look at all the full photos on Google for that. That showed up right next to a a radio telescope dish. Okay, so it's almost like saying, "Hey guys, we got your message from a radio telescope, and we're putting it right beside a radio telescope in reply." So they're trying to speak our language, right? But if you're dumbing down the message and just putting "I love you" or "Hey, we're from this star, we're from Venus, and we care about you," I don't think it's gonna have as deep an impact.
I
And
don't know. If I woke up one morning and there was a crop circle which just said "I heart you," like,
but
I think that'd be kind of sweet.
you're also saying that basically, if you do that, you're basically saying, well, we can't decipher if this is made by man or not. But if you make it with geometry and you make it incredibly complex, beautiful, and it has an underlying message, then you're saying the authors of this are not man. The authors of this are some intelligence that's greater. And I think that's the
Yeah.
purpose. If you put "I love Lucy," then somebody's going to say, okay, somebody's a pop fanatic and wanted to pull up some 1950s sitcom and put it into the middle of a field. But if you're putting something like the Arecibo message, you're saying, whoa, what's this? Who are the authors of this?
So ironic you should say that though, because I believe, isn't it the kind of radio waves which kind of would travel the furthest quickest? So like some of that pop culture stuff could have been the
Yep.
first things which aliens got
Have
about.
seen. Yes, and that's the fact. Like, we are spamming the cosmos with our television and radio signals from history. There's people that believe that organizations like SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and other establishments that have set up radio telescopes to receive messages like this are receiving information, but they're not keeping it. They're keeping it from the public. And so people will also argue, like, why would they do a crop formation when they have, or when we have NASA research institutes like SETI that should be receiving this? But if you look at Seth Shostak, he and his organization since the beginning have said every single message or mysterious bloop we've heard from the stars is nothing. Nothing. And we have, the massive telescope array that's across South Africa and Australia. And you're telling me that this is the surface area now of a whole planet, and they're not receiving any information or seeing anything that the public should know about? I don't think so. I think that some of these research agencies that are supposedly just working for public, like NASA, I believe that part of their mandate is to not leak information to the public that may be destabilizing.
Darcy,
And
I will say this though.
extraterrestrial and UFO related information is destabilizing to many people.
I will say this though, Darcy. The one thing you've put in my head, as well as all this wonderful information, is I now have got this image, and I think this would be inexplicable if overnight we saw, instead of a crop circle, just interlacing hearts all over a field. You're telling me that would be explicable? Come on, that would be a beautiful message to mankind from the stars.
Yeah, it would look like somebody mistakenly sent a bad WhatsApp message. But
hey, come on, there's got to be some aliens out there who just want to show the love.
But I'll add one thing to, one of your questions you asked earlier, in terms of this phenomenon. So people say the orbs, like, why the orbs, and I think the orbs or these other light flashes that we've seen possibly be responsible for some of these crop glyphs or these agroglyphs showing up. I don't think that they're, a craft. I think there's some form of technology that we don't understand yet that is remote, is kind of like a drone. We have all kinds of drones. We've had drones since the SR-71 days, that are remotely operated and have a task of observing parts of the planet clandestinely, like very secretly, and then maybe self-destructing or taking off back to a base. But yep. If you are an intelligent race, I'm sure at some point in your evolution technologically, you're going to create drones that are able to do things that we don't even understand yet. And possibly these orbs that we're seeing are examples of drone technology, because you can't imagine a pilot being inside of like this sphere of light that's like this big, right? But you can imagine that somebody's maybe sitting way off and they're intelligently controlling that technology to do a specific thing. And, I think that's more logical what those objects we're seeing are.
On a kind of similar note, it seems, and I am aware, especially since it's featured in the documentary, that there can be crop circles in a number of different countries around the world. But it seems to be there's a great concentration in the UK and in England. Is there anything to which you owe that?
Yeah, so the idea here is a continuity of messaging. If you have a friend, for example, that you're deciding to start a conversation with, and you decide to connect with them on WhatsApp, and after about 5 sentences of dialogue, you decide to switch over your conversation to Facebook Messenger. They're going to be like, well, that's weird. Okay, I'll type them here. But then after 5 sentences there, they decide, okay, I'm going to move this conversation to email. And you're like, what is going on here? Then they move after 5 sentences of dialogue from email to text message, SMS. The history and the communication of that that story gets a little bit lost, right? And you're probably going to aggravate your friend, you're going to confuse them, and they're going to seem disinterested at one point and not want to continue this conversation or continue with this dialogue. I think what happens here, what we've been seeing, if we believe that this has been happening for a long history in the Wiltshire area, we have to believe that this is a continuity of messaging. Whoever's leaving these intelligent messages are trying to say, we're here, we're watching you, we see where you've been, where you are, and where you're going, and we have some empathy, we have some compassion towards you, and we want to continue this conversation. So that's my explanation for it. Gary King's explanation of why it happens here than predominantly anywhere else in the world. His theory is that this is where really the modern civilization and farming was born. Some people will say the Sumerians created, agriculture, but really what they had was just gardens. It wasn't mass industrial farming like we know. In the UK, in the Wiltshire area, is where we clear cut forests, we laid massive crops, and it was through those crops that the British Empire was able to spread around the world, invade parts of India, and continue to grow crops there in that same fashion, and amassed wealth and created a empire that networked the whole world. And we are, I'm from Canada. I'm part of that Commonwealth. The Australians are. The United States would not be the United States unless some Brits said, hey, let's go put some plants in the fields over there.
And I thank you to reminding them.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, whoever's been watching us has sort of seen that the modern history of mankind has really been born from this farming in the Wiltshire area.
Yeah.
And it's possible that they know if we start this continuity of messaging there and continue it there, it will have a more long-lasting effect. And it still does,
I think my only question about that would be then, if they want consistency in messaging, I understand that. However, these aliens are obviously intelligent enough to kind of grasp so many concepts about us, yet they either haven't got or are ignoring the fact that we have all these different sovereign states which kind of believe different things, subscribe to different governments, all this sort of thing.
Yep.
Why would they not want to kind of try and contact as many different the different people of the earth?
Well, there have been stories of crop formations all over Europe, Australia, the United States. I was on a radio podcast the other day with Whitley Strieber, and he went to a crop circle in Texas, which again, it showed these examples of symmetry. The plants weren't broken. Everything was still growing. They were the first people to walk into it, like this type of thing. It's the same sort of phenomenon, but another part of the planet.
But there's less of them there.
There's less of them.
So why wouldn't there be kind of like the same amount if they? So either it's one thing or the other. Either they're keeping that consistency in messaging to England to kind of keep that, or they're doing it in more places. And why would there be more in one place and less in the others? I guess is what I'm getting at.
I think also just because the continuity thing. I think because if you're going to have your primary messaging to be in one place where it has amassed a huge amount of attention, like I said, in the 90s, it was at its peak. Then Doug and Dave came forward, debunked the whole thing. People turned their eyes away from it. And, to this day, many people just think it's bullshit. But that's unfortunate because it's never stopped. The phenomenon has, if anything, grown, and people are still traveling over the UK to see them as they appear. And like I said, it's a continuity of messaging. They're still going to leave some forms of messaging in other parts of the world. For example, UFOs don't just appear in the United States. People think that UFOs are some kind of mass delusion that's created by paranoid Americans. But in the UK, you guys have the Bentwaters incident, which is a Air Force base that had a UFO fly over and land and shoot light into nuclear storage silos and stuff. So, and this has been well reported, the Bentwaters incident. And it was American installation in the UK, but I think the Americans are the most hostile military on the planet. But you have the Westall 66 incident that happened in Australia, a mass daylight sighting. One or two, possibly three UFOs. One of them landed behind a elementary and high school in 1966, just outside of Melbourne. Students and teachers saw this. It was reported in the newspapers, and it had the same, the exact same sort of cover-up facts that we hear about many of these cases. The Royal Australian Air Force showed up at people's houses the next day and said, there's no such thing as UFOs. Don't talk about what you said. They took away cameras. They took away footage. Every trope that you're used to hearing about. And one science teacher that appeared in the newspaper was threatened that he would lose his teaching career if he ever did a newspaper appearance about this again. And where else? China. There's been airports that have been shut down in China.
Minutes. Then we got to kind of start wrapping this up.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is it's not just some, like, the phenomenon like this happens everywhere. But the really interesting messages, the really good history that we have about crop circle glyphs, these agroglyphs showing up, have happened by vast majority in the UK, and we can speculate why, but my thoughts are it's a continuity of messaging, and they may have been seeing where we've come from, and they're comparing where we've come from to where we're going.
Darcy, thank you very much for all this wonderful conversation, this debate. I think it's really important. I think it's very important, especially these days, on any subject, to debate things back and forth and not be entrenched in our own opinions. So thank you very much for that. And I know it's always kind of like interesting to come in against a skeptic, so I appreciate that as well. Where can they find
you're
crop
very
circles?
You're very kind, and you've allowed me to be super long-winded about my opinions, because that's what they are in the end. But I'm sticking to them, and I really appreciate your ability to be kind at the same time as debating. Many people are not able to do that. There's a lot of jerks out there, and be happy to discuss this stuff anytime with you. If they want to check out other films I've created, some folks that have tuned into this.
Where can they find Crop Circle Realities, and when is it out?
This has been out since March 13th, and it's on many different cable and satellite providers like Dish Network, Verizon Fios, Cox Cable, and it also is on Google Play, iTunes, or Apple TV, I think is what it's called, many other streaming platforms as well. But if you go to my website, occultjourneys.com, you can watch the trailers for my films, and if you click on the poster for one of my films, it'll take you through to a site to stream it. Many of my films are free if you have Amazon Prime or Tubi TV.
Fantastic. And we are going to have you back on for talk about cryptics, if nothing else, because I find that fascinating.
Sure. Yeah.
Darcy, thank you very much for joining us tonight, or this morning for yourself. And guys, thank you very much for watching. If you want to catch any of this that you might have missed in audio form, please do listen to the Dr. Squee Show on thebear.live. That's on Thursday at 8 p.m. I have a car which I have lost. I have lost any ability to do half the stuff I usually do because we recently switched to a new streaming service, but I will work it out for next time we all meet. Darcy, by the way, yes, this is going out on radio this Thursday. Is there a particular song you'd like to hear going out this interview?
Particular song? Maybe a song by Chami. I think it's called Afterlife. Chami is Tchami.
Okay, so after a lot of furious Googling, if you're listening to this on the radio, you will be hearing Chami right now. But for those of you watching on video live, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you very much, Darcy Weir, and thank you to Geoffrey Calhoun for joining us earlier in the stream. And remember, guys, in a world where you can be anything, please be kind. I've been Dr. Squee, and that was my